This original WSRE presentation is made possible by viewers like you. Thank you.
A conversation with General Alexander Hamilton on this edition of Conversations. He is one of America's most influential founding fathers and one of our nation's great statesmen. We welcome to Conversations the Secretary of the United States Treasury, Alexander Hamilton. General Hamilton, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, sir. Glad to be with you.
I'm curious, how did you get in a position to become one of the key figures in the founding of this great nation?
Well, I must confess, sir, you may not have time for me to tell the story entirely. I was born in what one might call awkward circumstances in the Caribbean. My parents were married, not to one another, and this was a great a burden. My mother had been married against her will to a vile man who beat her and was a monster. She fled and found my father, fell in love, and my older brother and I were the result of that love. They were married in all ways but law, but because of the laws of the day, for example, my birth records were marked with the phrase, obscene child, to ensure that I would never be allowed into what you might call a public school. So I should explain, I'm not a modest man. I once said, I'm aware of my talents, I only wonder why I'm not more handsome. And so you'll forgive me as I flatter myself. It was the first good, great fortune of my life. I was apprenticed to a merchant named Nicholas Kruger. I, within a few weeks, was running what you would call a multinational import-export corporation. I was but 14. At the age of 16, it was recognized that I should be educated properly, and I was sent to the United States, then a colony, first attending Elizabethtown College, a preparatory school, you might say. I completed what you call your kindergarten through 12th grade in some 9 months, and then presented myself to the College of New Jersey, now known as Princeton University, and I spoke to the Reverend Witherspoon, the president, said, I wish to be admitted as a student on special status. I am simply, how shall I say this, a better than students you've had before. So I wish to take the courses that I wish, in the manner I wish, in the order I wish, and I will tell you when I am finished with your school, and you may award me my degree. They were initially agreeable, but ultimately recalled an individual not quite as brilliant who had suffered what you might call a nervous breakdown for attempting such a course of study, and I was declined. That individual, by the way, was named James Madison.
Oh, okay, I see.
So I presented myself then to King's College, now known as your Columbia University, where my request was honored. I did not graduate because the Revolutionary War intervened, but through my own character, my own achievements, I was offered important positions by a number of generals until General Washington, the first and best of all of us, asked me to become his aide-de-camp, his chief of staff, essentially. And one does not turn down General Washington. And we began a relationship that was father and son in all ways but biology. And it was through the general and his great aegis that I became more successful in what you call a founding father, what I call a hard-working man working for what is in the best interests of liberty.
Tell me about George Washington. What kind of man was he?
Well, the general, who I always called him Your Excellency, out of great respect, you in your day are, forgive me, sir, poorly taught. You are taught that history are names and dates to be memorized. That I say George Washington, and you likely think of a white marble statue, or perhaps a mountain in remote Dakota where his visage is carved. To me, he was a very real man. I adored him, but yet I wrote of him. He is a most horrid swearer and blasphemer, a man capable of purple and volcanic rages.
Really?
This makes the general, in my opinion, far more interesting, not less. He was a mighty man. He was the best horseman, the best dancer in Virginia, a man of incredible character, and the best of all of us.
What did you learn from him that you took away as being the most valuable thing?
Well, I should say what he attempted to teach me, perhaps was patience. You must understand that I was born in these horrid circumstances. My great adversary, Mr. Jefferson's first sentient memory is being carried on a silken pillow by a slave woman. Mine is growing up in desperate poverty, one of 600 whites on an island with 15,000 enslaved Africans. And these experiences cannot help but shape one's view. And I was impatient. And as a result, I worked enormously hard. I worked many, many hours every day. I would, in school, read for 12 hours a day and then study late into the night. And the general would try to teach me some patience and perhaps one might say some measure of scaling one's efforts. I confess it was not a lesson well received, for I was always in a hurry.
The Founding Fathers created something that has lasted for a long time.
The longest surviving written constitution in the history of the world.
How did you guys come up with such a great, shall we say, format or a great structure that has allowed this country to excel?
Well, you will recall that following the Revolution, we had the Articles of Confederation. It was a response against King George in the British Empire, a loose confederation of states with no real power. It required 9 of the 13 for any significant decision. Some required unanimity. And we knew that Rhode Island, which we always called Rogue Island, because it was full of foolish and stupid men, they refused to come to the convention. They refused to sign and ratify the Constitution for many years. They rejected any effort to make important changes. So we had a powerless government. If you, sir, were a citizen of New York and you wished to cross into New Jersey, you would have to change your currency because your New York dollars would not buy anything in New Jersey. And it was recognized that we needed to make some changes. And so we held a meeting in Annapolis, which we pretended was a significant convention. We pretended we had a quorum. And we called for an actual national convention to, the claim was to revise and correct the Articles of Confederation in the summer of '87 in Philadelphia. Many of us knew that our effort was frankly to replace the Articles with a constitution. And so we had the Federalists, the Anti-Federalists, those who supported the Articles. We met over the summer. I was there much of the time. I did leave on 3 separate occasions to attend business, as many did. But ultimately, we produced a Constitution. Now, it had flaws. I would refer late in life to the Constitution as a thing of milk and water, a frail and worthless fabric I had spent my life propping up. It was not strong enough. For example, one of the things that we came within a single vote of adding to the Constitution was allowing the national government in Washington City to nullify any law passed by a state that was not, in our view, consistent with the goals of the nation. Can you imagine how Mr. Jefferson's War, your Civil War, might have been different if the federal government had been able to alter the laws of states sinning against morality? And so the Constitution was dealt a handicap. You call it the Bill of Rights, which is a singularly stupid and foolish thing to add to a constitution. But ultimately it was ratified. The Anti-Federalists did come on board. And for all its faults, for all its frailties, it has become, as I say, the longest surviving written constitution in world history.
Now, you were Secretary of Treasury.
I was.
You're credited with establishing basically the foundation of our financial system in America. What was the key to making it a long-lasting, thriving foundation?
Well, may I give you a 2-hour economic lecture?
You may, but I'm not sure the audience will stick around for it.
Well, I shall attempt to be briefer. Fundamentally, at the core is the notion of what I call the invigorating principle of credit. In your day, your national debt, I am told, is a subject of great discussion. Mm-hmm. And indeed, the concept of a debt is considered by some to be foolish and dangerous. They themselves are foolish and dangerous to believe this. The invigorating principle of credit comes from banks, which I call the nurseries of liberty. You in your own life likely do not have enough coin in your coin purse to purchase your home for its full cash value on the day in which you make your purchase. Instead, you engage in what you call a mortgage, a well-managed debt. And that well-managed debt allows you not only to buy the house, but it employs the builders of the house, those who tend to your lawn, those who put in your plumbing and your other fixtures. So a well-managed debt can be what I call the national blessing. And so what I engaged in as Secretary of the Treasury, the first Secretary of the Treasury, was an attempt to engage the nation to bring the rich, the wise, the well-born into an economic system. We created a national bank, which was capitalized in 30 days at a greater rate than all the money in all the other banks in the country combined. During my time, I flatter myself as Secretary of the Treasury, we went from being the worst risk for foreign investment in the world to being the very best. And as a result of that proper use of credit and unifying the national debt in one place, we were able to create an engine of commerce unmatched in the world.
General Hamilton, in 2008, 2009, the United States went through a very challenging time with a financial crisis. Had you been Secretary of Treasury, would you have handled it differently than how it was handled?
I shall be cautious in answering. Mr. Jefferson, my great adversary, was foolish in many ways, but he did say that the earth belongs to the living. The notion that I, as a man from a world in which information could travel no faster than a galloping horse or a ship at sea, would give you advice on how to handle financial transactions which happen, I'm told, in thousandths of seconds. It'd be arrogant of me to do so. I will simply say this. If you uncouple the government from any regulatory ability in your market, you create a situation in which greedy men may thrive. And if you remove from their actions any consequence, they will thrive with great enthusiasm. And so I would simply suggest that you be careful in how you manage your economics, because the government is inherently part of that economic process. If you don't have a national bank, I'm told you now have a thing you call the Federal Reserve System, which is involved in monetary policy, or Congress engages in fiscal policy. There is an absolute essential intercourse between the two, and you are at risk of your economy if you allow one or the other to thrive without any consideration for the other half. So I would encourage you to invest wisely.
Our country is full of checks and balances.
Indeed.
You guys did such a wonderful job of creating that.
No, I thank you, sir.
Tell me about that. What was the thought process during that?
Well, I am sure you have read the Federalist Papers, and I'm sure your audience rereads them regularly, because they are, they started, of course, as political propaganda. I will readily admit this. Mr. Madison and I and Mr. Jay wrote these 85 papers in an effort to convince the citizens, especially of New York, that the Constitution, which was being portrayed by the Anti-Federalists as a dangerous usurpation of liberty, was in fact the only thing that ultimately defends liberty. That a large government with many factions involved is the only way to truly protect your liberty. That a small republic is actually more dangerous to your freedom than a large. And so in the Federalist Papers, Mr. Madison, to some degree, I wrote 2/3, Mr. Madison about 1/3, Mr. Jay only 6 before an attack of gout caused him to step away. But Mr. Madison wrote in Federalist number 10 that if men were angels, no government would be necessary. But because men are not angels, you must set up a government in which the factions themselves, what you would call political parties, special interest groups, the people who seek disproportionate power for themselves that they would take from others, those individuals can only be hobbled, not by the goodness of man. Man is not. I wrote man is ambitious, vindictive, and vituperative in Federalist number 6. Man is greedy. And so you take that actual greed and you harness it by saying that one faction can never be allowed to become so powerful that it can dominate. And the only way you can do that is by having multiple competing factions. And so you have all these groups fighting for power will ensure that no one group gets too much. And so the core of the brilliance of the Constitution, as outlined by Mr. Madison in Federalist number 10, is we will take that very nature of man, which is a negative, and we will turn it to our advantage in protecting your liberty.
And it has certainly withstood the test of time.
I like to think so, sir.
Yes. In our world today, many of us view politics as being very divisive and in some ways just downright mean to each other and whatnot. But things were rather rough and tumble in your day. I mean, how do you see...
You have much to learn about negative ads. I will simply say this. Every age, I believe, thinks that they are the first age to encounter a particular political phenomenon. In your day, you were troubled by the vituperative spirit that seems to exist between all of your political leaders. This was no different in our day. We simply had a certain civility to it. If you saw Mr. Jefferson and I walking down the street, you would notice chatting amiably, perhaps arm in arm, discussing an issue of importance. And at the end of the day, we would each retreat to our homes or our offices, and we would write horrible things about the other to be published anonymously. For example, you talked today in your day about negative advertisements attacking an individual. Well, I will tell you of one in the election of 1800, the dirtiest election perhaps in American history, where Mr. Jefferson and Mr. Adams competed, and I played some small role, ironically enough, in Mr. Jefferson's election. But there was a broadside, what you might call a political poster, the advertising of the day, which said this. It said of Mr. Jefferson, "If the atheist Jefferson is elected, every Bible in America will be seized and burned, every virgin deflowered, and the streets will run red with the blood of murdered patriots." That, sir, is a negative ad.
I would say indeed it is. Politicians, male politicians, have gotten themselves in trouble over the years by, shall we say, straying outside of their marriage. You had a little bit of experience with that.
Now, I, sir, am the founder of your legal and economic system. I was involved in the American Revolution. I was one of your founding fathers, but you, sir, have turned to my private life.
I have.
I will remind you of this, sir. In my life, I was engaged in 11 affairs of honor.
Affairs of honor?
One of which ended in a duel. If you continue with this line of inquiry, the count may be 12. But you may continue, sir. You speak of Maria Reynolds.
Yes. Please talk about Mrs. Reynolds.
Now, Mrs. Reynolds presented herself to my office. We were away. We were in Philadelphia, and she presented herself as a New Yorker, a fellow New Yorker, lost, and she wondered if I could provide some assistance. I told her at the time that I had no currency with me, but if she would tell me where she was staying, I would be willing to stop in the evening and provide her some small financial support. I had a reputation for gallantry. And so, as I would write later in a pamphlet, one of the two colossal stupidities I will confess of publishing in my life, when I was called to explain this, I wrote that I appeared in her bedchamber and produced a note, a banknote from my pocket. And a conversation ensued in which it soon became clear that other than pecuniary consolation would be acceptable. And I was consoled on several occasions. I would soon be confronted by her husband, James Reynolds, who insisted that his sensibilities had been insulted to the degree that only $1,000 of cash could possibly mollify his outrage. I actually had to borrow half of it from a friend, but I did present it. And then I received two letters. The first was from Mr. Reynolds, in which he said, "Now that you have paid, I have no objection to you calling upon my wife as a friend." I then received a letter from Mrs. Reynolds, in which she said that her loneliness for me was so acute that if I did not attend to her, she would die of loneliness. Now, I could not allow her to die of loneliness.
Well, absolutely not.
The liaison was restarted. It continued for some period of time, and ultimately I did break it off. I thought that this would be the last I heard of it until Mr. Reynolds himself was arrested on the charge of speculating with public funds. That is to say, cheating in what you would call a stock market or land office with public monies. And his excuse was that, not that he was guilty, but that he had been acting as my minion, which was a damnable lie. And on one particularly unpleasant evening, I had three guests call on me, including Senator James Monroe, one of Mr. Jefferson's lackeys, who reported this charge. I was able to provide them with records, letters, literally canceled checks, proving that it had been an affair of the heart and not of finance. I was in a situation in which my honor was attacked, and I could not allow my public honor. I said, "You must be a Caesar's wife in your public dealings." They pronounced themselves satisfied and left, but Mr. Monroe kept the copies. And sometime later, this would appear as an attack on me. In the public, I responded with a 96-page pamphlet in which I documented that it was an affair of the heart and not of finance. It was an awkward time. But I will say this of Mr. Monroe. He later became president, as you know. And long after my death, when my widow, Elizabeth, a remarkable woman who would wear black every day of her life for the remainder after my passing, was an old woman, he was an old man, and apparently he felt some guilt. And he appeared at the home and wished to speak to Elizabeth about forgiving and forgetting. Well, she refused to see him. And the children said, "Mother, you must see him, for he is a former president of the United States." And he was shown into a room with a single chair in which Elizabeth was already seated. And he gave a speech about forgiving and forgetting. And Elizabeth looked him in the eye and she said this. She said, "Mr. Monroe, if you have come here to say that you are sorry, very sorry, for the misrepresentations and the stories and the slanders you said against my dear husband, so be it. But if not, no passage of time, no nearness of grave makes any difference." And she threw him out. I was married to a remarkable woman.
You were indeed. Tell me about Aaron Burr.
Again, sir, you wish to go to Colonel Burr.
Yes.
We could talk economics. We could talk your Supreme Court. But you wish to talk about Aaron Burr. You, sir, are a ruffian, but I will answer
This
your
is the
question.
kind of stuff that gets ratings.
That is a commentary in your time, sir, not on mine. Colonel Burr, I will give you an example. When General Washington added me to his staff, I was with him for some 4 years and was his closest advisor. Colonel Burr lasted but 10 days on the general staff before he was sacked for opening and reading the general's private correspondence. I wrote of Colonel Burr, "He is for or against nothing but suits his own interest or ambition. If there is an embryo Caesar in America, 'tis Burr." And yet, we often ended up as co-counsels in legal cases. There was a case, Lagoon, where, if you can imagine a sum so great, I achieved a settlement for my client of $170,000. I billed $1,500 as lead counsel. Colonel Burr would bill $2,500 as my deputy. Mm-hmm. He was a vile and despicable man. And in the election of 1800, which I mentioned moments ago, Thomas Jefferson, in the first truly partisan political act in American history, he understood that he would carry the electoral votes of the South because of the abomination known as the 3/5 clause. But he was not sure that he would be able to win enough electoral votes to defeat Mr. Adams in the North. And so he selected as his running mate a New Yorker, Colonel Burr, who was of the wrong party but was willing to switch, essentially. And the election was an awkward one. I had written the second colossal stupidity of my life, publishing a pamphlet attacking John Adams, in theory my party's standard bearer. And when the election dust settled, it was clear that Mr. Burr and Mr. Jefferson both had 73 electoral college votes. We did not yet have the 12th Amendment, which fixed the problem. We assumed that the greatest would be elected as president, the second greatest American would be elected as vice president. They would work together. This was an utter failure under Mr. Adams, because Mr. Jefferson had been his vice president. Mr. Adams, a foolish and vain little man, but not without character, approached Mr. Jefferson and said, "Sir, we are both elected. Shall we rule together?" And Mr. Jefferson said, "I think not, sir," and spent his time as vice president publishing attacks on Mr. Adams and me with public funds as vice president. So in 1800, Mr. Jefferson is elected and Mr. Burr is elected, both with the same count. Now, everyone in America knew that Mr. Jefferson was to be president and Colonel Burr vice president, everyone except Aaron Burr, who realized that now that the election had been thrown into the U.S. House of Representatives, if you could get a single state to switch, to flip, if you will, they would make Mr. Burr president and not Mr. Jefferson. This went on for 35 ballots. And at the end, I wrote a letter in which I said of Mr. Jefferson, "It is true that his politics are tinctured with fanaticism, that he was the primary enemy of the principal measures of the previous administration, that he is not mindful of the truth nor scrupulous of its means to success, and he is a contemptible hypocrite." But I said, Mr. Jefferson is to be preferred by every virtuous and prudent calculation, and he has pretensions to character. On the 36th vote, the delegate from Connecticut withheld his vote. Mr. Jefferson was elected president, Mr. Burr vice president, and Mr. Burr was disquieted.
And your relationship with Mr. Burr from there pretty much deteriorated.
It was never good, sir.
Yeah.
And I think what you were hinting at, that
Yes.
perhaps are too gentlemanly to ask, is what was the cause of the duel?
Yes.
And there are two answers. The first is a particular newspaper article in an Albany newspaper. I enjoyed going to parties. I loved ladies. The ladies loved me. I was unusual in the day because I was slender and gallant. And at this party, we were discussing Colonel Burr. And an article was published in which it said that General Hamilton relayed an even more despicable opinion of Colonel Burr. Colonel Burr took offense. But the true cause was a decades-long political realization by me that there was an embryo Caesar in America. 'Twas Burr. And so I opposed him in all his measures.
General Alexander Hamilton, in about 30 seconds, as you look back over history, are you surprised at how much of an influence you have had on America? So much so, there's even a hit Broadway show named after you.
Well, I've already said I'm not a modest man. And one of your historians, a man named Michael Lynn, said, "There is no monument to Hamilton on the National Mall. But until one is built, we shall have to settle for the other monuments to the Hamilton vision. Silicon Valley and Wall Street, the interstate highway system, our economic and legal system. I consider that, sir, an adequate tribute until the proper statue is built."
I would agree. General Alexander Hamilton, a real pleasure to have a conversation with you.
Indeed, sir.
All the best. Hope you enjoyed that. In real life, his name is Dr. Hal Bidlack. You can find out more about him and Alexander Hamilton at hamiltonlives.com. By the way, you can see more of our conversations online at wsre.org/conversations. We're also on Facebook and YouTube. I'm Jeff Weeks. Thank you so very much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the broadcast. Take wonderful care of yourself, and we'll see you soon.
Support for this program is provided in part by Gulf Power, a Southern company, and by viewers like you. Thank you.